I'm going to demonstrate how to take a Houdini Heightfield and bring it into Unreal Engine 4 as a landscape. And I'm going to cover the basic generation of the Heightfield in Houdini and the basic import process into Unreal Engine 4. Then we're going to paint it, add holes to it, and finally fix a collision problem that exists when you export a Houdini Heightfield into a Unreal Engine 4 landscape. So first we're going to do the basic Heightfield in Houdini and created a digital asset, a Houdini digital asset, which is basically a tool that you can create in Houdini. It has a set of parameters that you can modify and can be used by plugins that run the Houdini engine. And that plugin works with like Unreal Engine 4, Unity, and Maya, and some other programs as well. So we're going to be working in this demo folder that I have, and you can see it's empty. So we're going to open a new Houdini file. I'm using Houdini Indie, which is a commercial version of it, but you can do the same thing that I'm doing with the Apprentice version for free for non-commercial things. So I'm going to save this file to begin with to that demo folder, just in case something crashes. We'll call this Heightfield. Now we're going to create a geometry node here. We're going to dive into it, create a Heightfield, Heightfield noise, and we'll use that as our basic terrain for now. All right, so I'm going to go back to my geometry object, give it a different name called my Heightfield. Going to select it, go to Assets, New Digital Asset from Selection. And this is how I create my Houdini digital asset. It's asking me if I want to make a subnet from the selection first. I don't care to do that, so I'll say no. And now it's asking me where it's going to save this Houdini digital asset. And I'm just going to save it relative to the current file. So that's what this hip is right here. So we're going to call it Doug My Heightfield, I guess. It's kind of a dumb name, but I'll go with it. Accept. Says some instances, I'm getting a warning message saying some instances of my Heightfield have had their parameter layout modified. The parameter dialogues of these nodes will not reflect changes made to the parameter layout of this asset. You may either leave these nodes unchanged, keep the spare parameters on the nodes, but revert the layout changes, or delete the spare parameters completely. I actually don't know what the consequences of this are. So I'll go ahead and destroy all spare parameters. Why not? Let's see if something goes wrong. Okay, so what you see now is this is where you define the parameters for the digital asset I'm exporting. In a moment, I'll add an item to this, but for now, I'm just going to leave it as is. I'll hit accept. And now we can switch over to Unreal. And I have a new project ready to go. I'm going to save it to my demo folder and call it my project. It's just going to be a blueprint-based project. So we don't need to do any coding for this. No C++ coding. It's starting up on my other screen, which you can't see. So here's our default level. I don't want, I'm actually just going to make a new level that's completely empty. We're going to need a light in here. I'll make it unlit for now, actually, so we don't even need that. So I'm going to go to the Edit menu, go to Plugins, make sure that Houdini Engine is enabled here. If it's not, then you'll need to install it. And then I'm going to import that Houdini digital asset I created. And I put that right here. So my Heightfield's in, just drag and drop. Wait for it to cook. And there we go. So right now, you can't see it very good because I'm looking at it unlit. So I'm going to add, let me switch back to lit mode, which you won't be able to see anything. Add a directional light. And just to make things easier to see, we'll add a sky sphere and a skylight, why not? And I'm going to make these, the two lights, both movable so that it's just completely real time. We're not going to deal with any kind of baked lighting here. Then connect my sky sphere to my directional light. There. So you can see right now, material-wise, it's just using the default world material. And we'll change that in a moment. But first, I want to, oh, yeah, let's save this level. So I'm going to save this map as new map. That's fine. Doesn't matter. So the first thing I'm going to do is go off script right away. And what we're going to do is add a parameter that we can, so that we can control our Houdini asset from Unreal. And that's just to give you a taste of why you would want to do this, besides just using the power of Houdini to generate the Heightfield. You can actually tweak it in Unreal while you're working on your game. So back to Houdini. Let's say that I wanted to expose the noise, say amplitude. So I could go and change it in Houdini myself here. But if I actually wanted to be able to do that in Unreal, I can also do that by exposing this parameter. So set it back to what it was, which is 500. And what we do is we go to assets and we say edit asset properties. I'm going to edit the asset properties for the my Heightfield asset. Go to parameters, and we're going to just drag and drop this amplitude onto the parameters. So just put it here, and that's it. So I can name it something else I want. I'll call it like noise amplitude. While I'm here, I'll put element size in too. So I'll call it noise element size. Hit accept. Asset, save asset to update it. Then back to Unreal Engine. I'm actually going to save this before I mess with it. So right click on the Heightfield that I'd already imported and say, I could either re-import it, but then that would only affect new landscapes I dragged in. So I'm going to just rebuild all instances, which will re-import it and also update any instances in the world. So now when I click on my Heightfield, down here under Houdini parameters, which might be too small for you to see, I have noise amplitude and noise element size. So I can go and change these parameters directly here. So if I set this to 1,000, say I'll get really noisy terrain, it'll be bigger. If I set it to like 3,000, it'll be really big. Too much, obviously. Go back to 500, or I can change my element size and spread everything out a little bit more. Whatever I like. So when I do that, it actually recooks it using Houdini Engine. All right, so next thing we're going to do is create the UE4 landscape material. So right now it's just using this world material. So go to new material, we'll call it landscape. Open it up. And this is going to be pretty simple. We're just going to have 3 constants. And then this is covered by the Unreal Engine 4 landscape documentation, so I'm not going to talk about how doing landscape layers works. But we're going to add 3 layers for this demo. The first layer is going to be called mountaintop. We'll call the second layer slopes, steep slopes. And we'll call layer 3 the base. So that'll be everything else. So we'll bring these colors in. Those will be our base color. Our roughness, we'll just set that to a constant, like 0.9, so it's not too shiny. And then we'll give these some default values. So the first one is our mountaintop. We'll make it snowy, so like pretty white. The next one is our steep slopes. So we'll make that kind of like a, I don't know, like a grayish brownish color or something. And then finally we'll do base, which will make, it's like a really brown color, I guess. this one up just a little bit, just so we can see the contrast. Okay, that's it for here. Let that save. So now we want to apply that material to this landscape. So I could select the landscape and say, no, I want you to use my landscape material instead. And then if I go to the landscape and started to try and paint it, I would have those different layers available, and I could manually start to paint it now. Now I'd have to create my own layers in here. And as I do this, you're going to see the shaders recompiling. So apologies about that. But just so you can see, I'll fill it with the mountaintop color, paint on some steep slope color, paint on some base color, let the shaders compile. And this is just to verify that our landscape material is working like we expect. All right, you can see I'm painting on here now. So everything seems pretty good. I don't know if I gave it enough contrast between the mountaintops and the steep slopes, but it works, it's fine. So one thing you'll notice right off the bat though, is on the edge here, I'm getting this stretching. And on this edge, I'm also getting stretching. The edge has been clamped and then stretched out. And I don't know if that happens on every edge. Let's see. Yeah, it happens over on that edge as well, and on that edge, so every edge. And the reason why is because when I created this asset, I set my resolution to the default Houdini height map resolution, which is 1000 by 1000. And Unreal Engine 4 is particular about what resolutions it likes, and it actually wants it to be 1009 by 1009. And the Unreal Engine 4 Landscape Technical Guide talks about this and what resolutions are recommended, and a bunch of other reasons why, about like optimizing draw calls and these things and components which the landscape is broken up into. But that's beyond what we care about here. But we do care about getting rid of that stretching, so I will take care of that. So switching back to Houdini, we just go to the height field, and instead of 1000 by 1000, we'll pick 1009 by 1000 by 9. And if we wanted to, we could also expose the size as a parameter to the Houdini Digital Asset as well, just like we did with the Heightfield noise. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and save my asset. And whenever we update the asset, we need to re-import it into Unreal Engine. So right-click, rebuild all instances, which also does a re-import. And now you can see the edges are no longer stretched and with that kind of clamping look. It looks fine now. Okay, so next thing we want to do is, you notice it lost, when I ran the re-import, it lost the layers. It's like not connected. And that's because we haven't created any layers in Houdini yet. So the next step, let me make sure I'm staying on track, is to paint. And so what we're going to do is in Houdini is create 3 layers from masks, and we're going to match the names that we used in the UE4 landscape material. So in the UE4 landscape material, we used layers mountaintop, steep slopes, and base. So we're going to use those same names in Houdini. All right, so switching back to Houdini, what we're going to do is we're going to create masks, and in fact, I'll just create one right now. So we'll say Heightfield mask by feature. This is going to be the one for the mountaintops, and so we'll go ahead and create our mask from height. We'll compute the range and then change our ramps so that we're, just selecting the top peaks. There, so this is going to be the part we're going to paint white. Okay, so that's our first mask. So I'll just call this mountain top mask. And at the moment, if I show info here, I have 2, I'm probably going to get the name of this wrong, but voxel channels created. One is the height map, which is called height right here. The other one is mask, which is currently selected. Now I need to create 3 masks, and they each need to have a different name. So what I'm going to do is copy that mask into a different layer. So that's with the Heightfield copy layer node. By the way, one thing you see me doing is changing what node has the display flag. That affects that is basically the last node that's used to produce the output for the Houdini Digital Asset. So make sure that you always have that blue mark on the correct one. So here, my source is mask, and I'm going to call that mountain tops. Let me just double check that that's actually what it was called. No, singular, mountain top. Okay. So mountain top. Then I'm going to do another select for the steep slopes. So mask by feature, this time by slopes. We'll do any slope that's steep. And there we go. And then we'll copy that one into steep slopes. Again, I'm going to double check the name there. Steep slopes. Yep. And finally, everything else. And this is the trickiest one because Unreal Engine for landscapes use weight blended, this weight painting. And so every value that it needs to paint takes a weighting of, I might be screwing this up, but it's basically a weight painting of the different layers that you have, and at least one of them needs to be non-zero. But if all of them are 1, then it's not clear to me which layer would end up getting painted. So the way I do this is I combine all the layers that I've set up, like the first 2 layers, and then invert that and use that as the layer for my base to cover everything else, basically, to make sure everything's covered. If you don't have everything covered, you'll see it show up in Unreal as a black area. Okay, so first I'm going to take this top mask layer, and what I'm going to use is this node called Heightfield layer, and that lets you combine things together. So we're going to take the top mask, or actually the last one first. So let's just see. Terrain to layer. So we're going to take, oh, we also need to tell it that we're only working with the mask layer here. And then, so copy layer. So this is the mountain top layer. Oops, I put it in the wrong spot. This one is the steep slopes mask. Steep slopes layer. So I'm going to take the steep slopes layer and then add on to that the mountaintop mask. And I'm going to say add. I want to add them together. So that's everything I've masked out so far. And then the next thing I want to do is invert that, and I can do that using a remap node, Heightfield remap. And instead of mapping 0 to 0 and 1 to 1, I'm going to map 0 to 1 and 1 to 0. And I also need to make sure I'm working on the mask layer. So there's uninverted and then inverted. So let me just say what I'm doing. Invert, and then this is combine. Okay, and then this value right here is the one I'm going to copy to the base layer. Copy layer. We're going to call that base. Once again, let me double check. Yes, it is called base. Now, one thing that you need to be careful of is to make sure that, use the info button, check it, and make sure that at the final node, you have all the layers that you expect to have. So mountaintop, steep slopes, and base. If you just kind of, especially when you start working on the mask to do everything else, if you don't do it in the right order, for instance, if I took, let me just show you, if I change the ordering of these, the mask still looks correct. Like that's everything. And then I invert it. But then when you go and look at the info down here, I have height and mask, but not base. Or I'm sorry, I have height and mask and base, but I don't have anything else. And that's because the way that the data is passed down apparently comes down this left channel, the base terrain channel, and the things that are in the terrain to layer channel just get tossed on the floor. So everything that was created here, which includes my mountaintop layer and the steep slope layer, aren't included in the final result. So that's why the order of these things actually do matter. So like I said, click on your node, select I, and just take a look and make sure you should always have height because that's your height field. And then you should have all the masks that you want to paint on it. And mask will always be in there as well. So this looks good right now. So let's make sure the last one's clicked. And then I think we're good to go here. Let's click save. Let me go ahead and say base layer. All right, so save that asset out. Back to Unreal Engine. Right click and rebuild all instances again. Right. So now on my landscape, you'll notice that I have all those layers that I just created, but I lost my landscape material. Went back to world grid. And so while inconvenient, I could just switch it over here. Just drag it here. But if you end up doing that a lot, it gets a little annoying, so I'll just show you one quick trick. And that's going back to Houdini, and that's to create a new attribute. So create attribute, and we're going to call this Unreal Material. And then we give it a path to the Unreal Material that we want it to use by default. So I want to use this one, so I'm going to go ahead and copy a reference to that. And I'm going to make this a string type, paste it in there. Now, the regular UE4 material string reference didn't work for me, but this did. This path, which is kind of like a simplified path. It's just game/landscape. The other thing too is class needs to be set to either detail or primitive. And where you find that information out is in the Houdini Engine for Unreal documentation, which is just sideeffects.com/doc/unreal. If you go there and you go to parameters, I think it's parameters. No, sorry, special attributes and groups. You'll see a bunch of things that you can export from Houdini that get picked up by Unreal Engine, by the Houdini plugin in Unreal Engine. So the one I'm working with now is called Unreal Material. And you'll see this thing needs to either be a primitive or a detail. I'm just going to make it a primitive. So save my Heightfield again. Back to Houdini, sorry, back to Unreal. Re-import again, rebuild all instances, and this time I shouldn't lose my material. You can see it picked it up that time. So you can also see that it's automatically set up the layers for each one of these, and it has indeed painted it. It's a little ugly, but it worked. All right, I think that's the end of that section. So next part is creating holes. Now, you can either take this landscape and just start cutting holes in it, but then when you wanted to make a change to it in Houdini, you would lose the holes because it's going to regenerate the asset. So it'd be better if we can create the holes in Houdini itself. So again, if you go to that web page, which I just showed you, and down to the landscape section, they have a section here which says if your height field has a mask called visibility, then the plugin will use it for the landscape's visibility layer used to create landscape holes. And that's exactly what we're going to do. So back to Houdini. I'm going to just draw my own mask this time. We're just going to cut a hole out with this. So this will be my hole. It's going to be a big hole. Whoops. There. That'll be my hole. So I draw the hole, and then we have to copy it to a layer called visibility. Save the asset. Back to Unreal Engine. If you see me saving stuff like crazy, that's just because I'm a little paranoid. I don't know if you actually have to. So right click, re-import, or rebuild, I should say. So cool, you can see like something looks here like what I cut out, but it's not a hole. And that's because we have to set up a hole material. All right, so I basically want my hole material to be the same as the regular material, except with it's not going to be an opaque surface. So I'm going to duplicate it. We're going to call it landscape hole. Now, what I'm going to show you is like copy paste. You can consolidate your node network, especially when it gets more complicated using a material function. I'm not going to do that just for the sake of keeping this a little more brief than it is. So first thing we do is go down to blend mode opaque. We're going to make it masked. And then we're going to bring in the landscape visibility mask and hook that up to the opacity mask. That's all you have to do. This is covered in I believe landscape materials, docs.unrealengine.com. Well, just look for landscape materials, you'll find this page. And they have, I think, yeah, a section called landscape hole materials, which covers how this works. All right, so anyway, so this is our hole material. But our landscape doesn't know anything about it. So we have a normal material set, but we don't have a hole material set. So go ahead and just set it after a bit of compiling. You'll see the hole come in here. And then just like we did with the setting up the landscape name, the landscape material name in Houdini, we can do the same thing with the landscape hole material, which I'll show you as soon as this finishes. Okay, so now you can see there's the hole in our landscape. That one's not very convincing, but you know, use it for caves and stuff or underground areas. All right, so back to Houdini. Just like we use the attribute create in order to set a default material, there's another one called, I think it's called Unreal Material Hole, something like that. It's called Unreal Material Hole. Yes, it is. And again, it's a primitive or detail attribute, which we've already set here. And then and change it from landscape to landscape hole. So landscape hole attribute. Okay. Go ahead and save that. That just means if we do a re-import from now on, we don't have to attach it to our landscape material again. Okay, so I'll just prove that by right-clicking on here, rebuild all instances. Now the idea is once you get this thing in, you're adjusting parameters that you've exposed. You're not rebuilding the instances all the time. If you don't expose enough parameters, you will have to be rebuilding the instances. Okay, so that looks good. Everything's set up. and I can see through. So that's the end of that section. And then the last one is to address a collision problem. And the first thing I'm going to do is put a sphere that has physics turned on just to demonstrate the issue. So let's go and grab a sphere out of here. And we want to turn on simulate physics. And I'm also going to make it really big so it's easier to see. Right, so it's like a huge ball. Get a little closer to the ground. And I'm going to make a few copies of it. Now I put some under the train. Let me delete those. Okay. This one's kind of in both. Then, save the scene. Go and simulate that. Cool, cool, cool. And it just fell right through. Well, that actually worked the first time. Now, I guess I'll just tell you what happens sometimes. Like I've been working with terrain today, and I ran into this problem a couple times where I created the whole material, and you could see through it, but things would not fall through it. I don't know why. I reported the bug to side effects, and I'll just show you the workaround, even though it's already working for me right now. So obviously I wouldn't have to do the workaround now, but what I did is, and this is just pure trial and error, I have no idea why this works, is I went to, I clicked on the landscape and then went down to collision MIPS level and changed it to 1, then reran the simulation, and it would work at that point. And then I'd click on the landscape again and switch it back to 0, which is what it was to begin with, rerun the simulation again, and then it would work. So that was the workaround. If you do run into a problem where things aren't able to pass through the invisible hole area, go ahead and try that. Hopefully, if it is, maybe I screwed up in my other project, but if it is a bug, hopefully it gets fixed quickly. Hopefully you don't have to deal with it. Anyway, you don't want to leave, one thing I would say though is, unless you know what you're doing, you don't want to set the collision MIP level to 1, because that'll reduce the fidelity of your collisions. So you want it to be 0, because that's the MIP level with the highest fidelity. Right, so I think that's the last slide. Let me double check. So, yep. So just to reiterate, what we did was take a Houdini Heightfield, go to a landscape, painted it up, add holes, and then fix that collision problem, which didn't actually show up. All right, if you have any questions, just let me know in the comments below. I'll try and answer them. I'm not an expert on this. This is just me kind of learning experimentally and wanting to share for other people doing the same thing, and also for myself for future reference.